Welcome to This Week in Impact, where we bring you some of the most interesting impact investing and sustainable finance stories of the week, as covered by Impact Alpha. I'm Brian Walsh. It's Thursday, October 10th. I'm joined today by Impact Alpha's editor, David Bank. We'll discuss what's at stake as climate negotiators head to yet another petrostate for COP29 as they seek to craft a financial architecture for the net zero future. How inclusive fintech ventures are cutting in the middlemen and middlewomen to reach customers and build trust. And we'll look at two innovative financial models, one backing water entrepreneurs in emerging markets, and the other supporting land conservation in the US. That's coming up on This Week in Impact. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm just great, Brian. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. And now we spoke last week, David, about the devastating impacts of Hurricane Helene. And today we speak less than 24 hours after yet another major hurricane, Milton, struck Florida. Now, David, this one was personal for me as Milton came to shore as a strong Category 3 about 20 miles from where my parents, who are in their mid-80s, live. Now, fortunately, one of my brothers was able to travel to ride out the storm with them in a shelter set up in a local elementary school, and they're safely back home with full electricity and little damage. But it was perhaps too close a call. Now, Milton was the fifth named hurricane to strike the mainland of the U.S. so far this year, and the second Category 5 hurricane of the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season, which still runs until November 30th, so we're not out of the woods yet. Experts note that climate change is heating the oceans. These more frequent marine heat waves are causing more tropical storms to turn into strong hurricanes. Milton escalated from a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane in a single day. Which brings us to our first topic, David. The upcoming climate talks, known as COP29, taking place next month in Baku, Azerbaijan. As Amy Cortese reported for us this week, this is the second straight year that the gathering will be held in a country largely financed by fossil fuels. David, what are we to make of all this?
Well, I'm really glad your folks are okay, Brian. I think we all got a lesson in hurricane water dynamics in the last few weeks, and I'm sure you're now an expert on the heat, the phenomena in the Gulf of Mexico. So the urgency is apparent. Not so much necessarily among the global negotiators who are gathering. So you mentioned the COP. 29, people understand COP means Conference of the Parties. It dates from even before the Paris Climate Accords, but it's essentially the continuation of that negotiating process, and they meet each year. And this year, as you said, is in Baku. I've never been to Baku, but in my reading, I was very interested to learn it's an oil town, much like cities in Texas. They've had legendary gushers, oil spouting out of the ground when they strike that black gold. And it's been a major oil producer for many years, including during its years in the Soviet Union. And folks have some trepidation about going back again to an oil state. Last year's was in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And there was a silver lining, I suppose, which is that they were so keen to disprove the skeptics that quite a lot of money flowed from the UAE and is still flowing to a number of green and climate-related initiatives. Some of the civil society organizations, the climate advocates that we work with, are skipping Baku in favor of next year's COP30, which will be in Belém in Brazil, and is considered at some level the bigger COP or the main event. But you can't get to Belém or Brazil until you get through Baku, and a number of important initiatives and negotiations will take place in next month in Baku.
So, David, give us a taste. What's at stake in Baku?
Well, one of the key things that comes up at every COP is the so-called nationally determined contributions. And you remember the genius at some level, but also the flaw of the Paris Accords was that each country sets its own targets. And that was a way to get everybody in the tent and to have them start thinking about how they could cut their emissions and move towards net zero ultimately. And the targets vary wildly between between countries, but also countries are not actually even been meeting their own targets. Part of the Paris framework was that countries would gradually increase their targets, increase their ambitions as they got comfortable with clean energy investments and everything else. So again, in Baku, some countries will step forward, other countries will possibly be held to account of why they're not meeting or even raising their nationally determined contributions. The other thing that's at stake is the fund that was promised way back then to provide $100 billion in total, not to mention each year, for lesser developed countries to be able to finance the climate transition. And this was essentially a fairness mechanism because those countries, generally speaking, have contributed far less to the greenhouse gases that are heating those oceans in the Gulf of Mexico and elsewhere. And so to expect them to then invest to cut those emissions was seen as something that the richer countries should contribute to. And so this $100 billion has never quite materialized and becomes an issue each year. There's now something that's taking it up a level to the, in bureaucracy speak, the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, or the NCQG. That doesn't quite roll off the tongue. And that will update and hopefully put some meat on the bones for the financing of the climate mitigation adaptation for developing countries.
So that's what's going to be going on in Baku next month. But looking ahead, why are folks more excited about COP30 in 2025 in Brazil?
Well, Brazil is an interesting place. They're the chair of the G20, and they're also the host of COP30, and obviously also the location for most of the Amazon. And Lula, the president there, has made rainforest conservation, one of his hallmarks. He's promoting something called the Tropical Forests Forever Facility. It's something like $125 billion fund to protect and restore forests. Some 25 billion of that would be kind of governments and philanthropy as kind of catalytic capital, and then $100 billion in private capital. He's been a leader in this movement of getting the lesser developed countries to have a fair shake in all of these kinds of negotiations. The South Africa is taking over the G20 after Brazil, and they're also keen on that agenda. And of course, Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, who's led something that's called the Bridgetown Initiative or the Bridgetown Manifesto, is envisioning a whole new architecture for the global development finance, the development finance institutions, the multilateral banks, the World Bank, and it's all going to be front and center at COP30 in Brazil, probably even more so than this year in Baku.
Now, and tell us a little bit about this growing awareness around the biodiversity challenge and the kind of parallel biodiversity COP, or Convention on Biological Diversity, that's also taking place soon.
Yeah, just thinking, if you didn't get enough of your UN sort of acronyms, there's another whole negotiating process around biodiversity, and their COP, only number 16, is taking place in Cali, Colombia. And that has its own version of the Paris Climate Accord. It's called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Similarly has country goals for biodiversity preservation. There's obviously a clear connection between biodiversity and climate. So many folks are arguing to unify those tracks and bring them together, including a third track around desertification. So all of that would obviously bring together some of the more nature-based solutions more front and center into the climate discussion, and make biodiversity sort of a higher priority as well for global climate negotiators. So there is, a global movement, and there's a kind of global framework, and their plans are laid, and the urgency, obviously, as you said at the top, is high. And now it's time for countries to step up their ambitions, and frankly for private investors and global finance as well to step up the money.
And we need the money flows in order to finance all of this great work that needs to happen.
Indeed, and as we always say at Impact Alpha, that's a huge, opportunity, huge investment opportunity, huge rotation or revolution in global finance, not just a sort of government budget item or a philanthropy matter. So, private investors, it's all laid out for you.
All right, so we have climate, nature, and desertification. Oh my. But with that, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll discuss how inclusive fintech ventures are cutting in the middlemen and middlewomen to reach customers and build trust. In markets where fragmentation and inadequate infrastructure create massive inefficiencies, people often think that cutting out the middleman is the right solution. But as Jessica Pothering reported for us this week, in emerging markets, many impact tech startups are cutting them in. David, why are we seeing re-intermediation instead of disintermediation?
Hey Brian, those are two of my favorite words. Those have been like buzzwords in the tech world for a long time, and many startup business models have been built on disintermediating somebody. And as you said, that all sounds good. Go direct, cut out the brokers, cut out the middlemen. It turns out in many of these markets and for many kinds of products and services, the agents and the brokers and the folks that actually do the hand holding for customers and that are the person you can find when your fintech app goes awry somehow, that all of that is actually what's needed to bring a kind of a level of products and services to rural, low income, remote customers, particularly in Africa, in the case of the story that Jessica wrote, but in other markets as well.
So for some of these products, these products are sold, not bought. So you need brokers and others to kind of sell the benefits to their potential customers. Can you give us a few examples that Jessica pointed out to us?
Yeah, there's a company in Kenya called Lami that does insurance for accidents, economic shocks, natural disasters. The insurance coverage in Africa is very low, something like 3%, and so folks don't understand the model or necessarily the value proposition of paying money for something that might or may not happen. Clearly, in the climate context and in other contexts, people are often one accident or one natural disaster away from poverty. And so a lot of companies and impact folks have thought that insurance is a good way to kind of safeguard folks' economic security. But as you say, you need to have people make that case, and you need to have insurance agents out there telling people about the benefits and also explaining how the payments work and all that kind of good stuff. And so Lami had started going direct to consumers. It was finding that hard going, and now pivoted to having a tool for brokers to be able to sell, and that's going great. Many of the companies that do things like off-grid solar lanterns and things, Bbox, Mcopa, Zola, again, had often gone direct to consumers, but as those products become more complex and the pay-as-you-go model, has its own issues, it turns out having a human being there doing the sales and hand holding and just being the representative or the agent turns out to be crucial to their growth. They're all getting into things like electric motorbikes, mobile phones, irrigation systems, and other things. So humans in the chain.
Now, is that because the customers in these markets aren't necessarily as primed to go onto online platforms to find these deals, and they need that kind of human touch? Is this just as simple as priming the market for these new products by having them be sold by a fellow human?
I guess you could say that. I think the key word is trust, and it's partly maybe a function of not being as familiar with some of the new kinds of services, not trusting that a sort of fully tech-enabled system is going to be there when you need it. And it's also just the folks that people have worked with. So if you're going to sell agricultural inputs to farmers to help improve their yields, the person at the farm supply distribution point that they've dealt with for years in other contexts, may be the best point of contact for introducing new products as well. So there's a company, Tolby in Senegal, partners with agribusinesses to sell to onboard farmers into this sort of weather insights and mobile field service. In Morocco, there's a company called Anakel that works with commuter transport drivers to book shared ride services. So sort of instead of competing with them, sort of helping them become the agents for the customers. And the investors in these companies, we talked to Axion, Venture Labs, also to Elevar. They're increasingly seeing that the successful companies are the ones that have these human agents that can, as you say, reach customers, but really build trust with customers.
Right, and so not only does bringing in these agents, these brokers, these middle people to connect between the business and the customer, help the customers establish trust, but it's also creating a livelihood for the middle people.
Yeah, I mean, middlemen and women, I guess, get a bad rap as some kind of overhead or tax on the system. But to the extent that they're kind of increasing the pie and bringing new customers in and increasing revenues for the company as well as increasing value for the customers, they're adding value and they should get paid for it as well. So as you say, being that kind of agent and a trusted agent is a livelihood. And Amit Patel at Elevar, said instead of completely dismantling the middlemen, you're bringing them in and giving them a slice of the pie. So bigger pie is usually a good thing all around.
Right. So the disruption here is not the disintermediation, but again, it's the re-intermediation.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, well, let's take another quick break. When we come back, we'll discuss two examples of innovative finance in action, one backing water entrepreneurs in emerging markets, and the other conserving land in the U.S. David, Impact Alpha regularly covers agents of impact developing new models of impact finance. This week, we cover two examples that speak to the diverse challenges these models are designed to address: water in emerging markets and land conservation in the U.S. Let's start with the example our Rudy Sonatas wrote about, Water Unite Impact, an investment fund for water-focused tech entrepreneurs in emerging markets. What's unique about how this fund is being financed?
Yeah, well, we've been writing, about catalytic capital and how it can bring in commercial capital. So with things like first loss guarantees and various kinds of risk mitigation. And this is an example of that. But what's different is that the catalytic capital is supplied by a number of corporate foundations, particularly UK retailers. And so places like Co-op Group and Elior are providing the first loss capital for a fund that will invest in water entrepreneurs, particularly in emerging markets. And one of the sort of nifty things is that they're providing an amount into this fund per bottle of water sold. You can sort of say what you will about bottled water, but each bottle of water that Co-op Group, one of the big retailers in the UK, sells helps provide the first loss capital that brings in the commercial capital to invest in water entrepreneurs in places like Uganda, Zambia, or the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So what's interesting here is that, we've had examples of private companies saying, oh, we'll donate a portion of all sales to charity. That example has been around for decades, if not longer. And what's interesting here is that it's not just saying we're donating this to charity, but we are donating this to make a catalytic investment in a for-profit fund.
Yeah, that's the scalable impact kind of model that many foundations are taking, and now including corporate foundations moving away, as you say, from a sort of straight up charity model, even moving away a little bit from what had been CSR or corporate social responsibility, and saying how can we actually play a role in bringing commercial capital in. What's interesting also in this case is that the catalyzed capital is coming from some of the development financial institutions. So in the case of Water Unite, they did get some of this corporate risk mitigation money, first loss reserves, and now they've gotten $7.5 million from the U.S. International Development Finance Corp in lending money, in debt capital. So that is an interesting case where the corporations are essentially backstopping the development finance institutions like the DFC.
So it's like corporate dollars to backstop government dollars to then ultimately attract commercial capital to invest in water entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and some of these, entrepreneurs are folks like Jibu we've written about in the past. They set up local entrepreneurs who filter and bottle the water and get it out to villages and other places. And again, there's different points of view on kind of privatization of water, and there's obviously issues involved there, but in many cases it requires somebody doing that work of filtering the water, testing it, bottling it up, getting it out, distributing it. Again, similar to the last item that we talked about, you need people to actually do these intermediary steps to be able to bring products and services to market.
All right, now let's look at our next example, which focuses on financing the purchase of private land for conservation in the U.S. Now, the U.S. Forestry Service already owns 193 million acres of public land, though within the boundaries of that land is nearly 40 million acres of so-called inholdings. That's private land, which complicates the Forest Service management and conservation efforts. Now, David, the authors of a new feasibility study had a guest post this week making the case for a new financing model to more effectively enable the purchase of those private inholdings. What does this model look like?
Well, as you say, there have been things, land trusts for many years, and what they do is essentially provide bridge financing so that to snap up these parcels, like you say, they come to market, every so often, and to be able to secure them, you need to be able to move fast, like private buyers might. And sometimes the government agencies obviously don't move that fast. So the land trusts have been around for a while, buying up these properties, and then when the budget clearance comes through, they transfer them to both state and local and federal agencies, including the Forest Service. What turns out to be the case is that even those land trusts need a cheap source of capital. They don't want to go to the banks, particularly in a higher interest rate environment, and pay those rates. It makes those kinds of deals not work for them. So this is a level up from the land trust, and essentially a source of low cost capital that the land trust can use to be able to then secure these parcels and then eventually sell them to the Forest Service, which does have a budget for such purchases, but that can take years, like 10 years in some cases.
And so this model is called a revolving loan fund. So what does it mean to be a revolving loan fund?
Well, it just means simply it'll revolve, meaning that when these parcels get recycled to the government, then that money comes back and it can be used again to help secure another purchase. So again, it's just putting some money kind of into a fund that can be drawn down and replenished, and drawn down again and replenished, and essentially be the source of low cost capital for the land trusts and conservation organizations, again, to be able to move fast, or certainly faster than the federal government can.
All right, that's super interesting. To read more details about the revolving loan fund and the Water Unite Impact Fund, we'll throw some links to the articles in our show notes. All right, that's going to do it for This Week in Impact. Thank you, David.
Thank you, as always, Brian.
And thank you all for listening. This Week in Impact is a production of Impact Alpha and part of the Impact Alpha podcast network. Smart conversations by and for impact investing professionals. For more exclusive stories about the world of impact investing and sustainable finance, join thousands of other agents of impact by subscribing. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe for full access. If you like the show, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and be sure to leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps other people discover the show. Thanks, as always, to our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. For David Bank, I'm Brian Walsh. We'll see you next week for more Impact.